Welcome to Lesson 2, Why Most Efforts Are Ineffective. I'm Nathan Kinch, your instructor and one of the co-founders of Greater Than Learning. Today we'll cover number 1, a quick overview of the Ethics Center's ethics framework, purpose, values, and principles. Number 2, what principles-based approaches to data ethics are. Number 3, the limitations of these approaches in the context of ethical decision-making in a modern data-driven business. And number 4, the limitations that these approaches have when considering behavior change. You'll finish this lesson, number 1, better able to remember the basics of the limitations that principles-based approaches have. Number 2, better able to understand these limitations in the context of behavior change. Number 3, better able to understand that this is a complex and nuanced challenge when it comes to changing our collective behavior within the context of a modern organization. And number 4, you'll have greater confidence that you can have a discussion about these challenges with your colleagues and within the Greater Than Learning community. You've probably seen reference to this in our onboarding process. Hopefully you engaged actively and didn't agreement bypass bias, but that's for another time. Let's recap quickly with the Ethics Center's framework that describes the idea that ethics is actually a decision-making process. The process is about making decisions in direct alignment to your, or in this case, your organization's purpose, values, and principles. The Ethics Center defines purpose as our reason for being. Our purpose helps to explain and to animate our choice of core values and principles. Values, they identify what's good. They're the things that we strive for, that we desire, and that we seek to protect. And principles, well, they help us identify what is right. They outline how we may or may not achieve what is good. These principles, they exist to guide our behaviors. They give us clarity and directional focus. In theory, this sounds great, but as we consistently observe in data ethics initiatives globally, operationalizing principles is challenging. As far as we can tell, approaches to data ethics that rely almost exclusively on principles are inherently limiting. For example, let's say I'm an engineer, right? And I'm working on a new product that proposes to incorporate some new and potentially different data processing activities to achieve the outcomes that it's optimizing for. Let's say the specific principle that I'm grappling with right now is net benefit. Maximize good, minimize bad. This is a pretty consequentialist or utilitarian principle. It's common across organizations and geographies, as is highlighted by the AI Ethics Lab's work. Now, the engineer might be thinking, like me in this situation, well, what is good? What is bad? For who? How do we measure this? What's the acceptable net benefit? Like if it's 51% good and 49% bad, have we achieved this principle? Oh, I think that was covered in training, but I can't bloody remember. Oh shit, look at the time. I've got to run to a meeting. I better make this decision fast. Who can I turn to? Who can give me some answers? You know, like, do we have a resource, a repository of past decisions that I can review and draw upon? Wait, the product, it doesn't actually work without this, given the way that we've designed it. So do we even have a choice? What about my bonus? It's tied to this very release cycle. Now, maybe that was a bit dramatic, but as you can see, the complexity, the nuance, and the ambiguity within this hypothetical situation inhibits the engineer, me acting, It inhibits the engineer's ability to act in alignment to the purpose, values, and principles of the organization. If we're in this situation, we're stuck. We lack the clarity to act. Let's think about this in the context of behavior change real quick. Recall the BJ Fogg model. Behavior happens when there's sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, and an effective prompt. These three things, MAP, have to be present at the same time. Now, a heck of a lot, including biases and heuristics, impact how we behave. We're not completely rational at all times. Things like time and deadlines, resource constraints, budgets, skills, knowledge, our existing processes and workflows. Each of these variables impacts our choice environment. So, although principles are useful and arguably the foundation of any operational approach to data ethics, principles alone will not reliably support the desired behaviors. Now, public discourse, it's shifted a bit over the last few years. Trust and ethics are discussed more than ever before. But the folks at forums like Davos advocating for these evolved approaches are arguably those least incentivized to make the changes that they are proposing. Am I being too harsh? Maybe. But let's judge the behavior. Ask yourself, since quote-unquote stakeholder capitalism has been proposed and supported by the likes of the Business Roundtable and the folks at Davos, what's changed? Sweet FA, as we'd say down under. So how do we make this ethical change happen? Well, like most things, it's kind of complicated, but we can and we should start tiny. It's all about making ethical, socially preferable decisions easier and more consistent. Back to reality. Remember, we're stuck in a context where we have an ethical decision to make about net benefit, this principle that we have. We're not clear on how to act. We are unsure of how to interpret the principle in practice. We're rushing. We're conscious of how this will impact the metrics that directly contribute to remuneration. We actually feel disincentivized to act ethically in alignment to this principle. After all, acting ethically in alignment to this principle might mean a lower or no quarterly bonus. What about that holiday with the family, right? Probably not a flying holiday these days, you might drive, but what about that holiday? In this scenario, both motivation and ability are insufficient. As a result, we don't cross the action line, meaning a poor trade-off is made or we're halted by inaction. So, how do we decrease the difficulty of acting in alignment with, in this case, our net benefit principle? We make the target behavior easier to do. But that's enough for today. More on this in lesson 3.